The way you push my buttons just right.
When we're fighting fire.
When two voices of nature collide.
When we're fighting fire.
Can't help but feel the temperature rise.
Fighting fire with fire.
Yo, SORC is fun, holy.
Maybe if we took a moment long enough to realize how alike we are.
Wow, we really like added vulnerable to this build. That's crazy. Yo guys, what is up? Max for Diablo 4 video, and today we're going over my update to the Fire SORC build. Now I put a leveling guide from 1 to 50 for our like Fire or Flame SORC, and I've now updated it. I've changed it. I wanted to make some changes to the build because I was getting some feedback that it was starting to fall off like pretty hard in terms of like waiting for enemies to die with fire damage. And I think you guys are going to really enjoy this update. This build mobs very, very quickly. It's great for blasting from 50 to 75. And the bossing damage is only going to get better and better. We've got respectable boss damage. We've got great mobbing. And currently on the build and all of the gameplay, the highest level glyph that I have is level 9. So there's just so much room for improvement. I've got some options of uniques that you can use to like improve your damage even more. I hope you guys really enjoy the guide. I will have an update for this once we get to endgame because I already know how we're going to scale the endgame damage up. So yeah, let's get right into it. So in the original guide, we were using Hydras and we were using Flame Walls and we were scaling our burn damage. And that was pretty solid. However, just scaling pure damage over time wasn't cutting it as much as I would have liked. And so we're adding some more immediate damage in the form of Fireball. Now, Fireball is okay leveling skill. Mainly people just use it for an enchant. However, with the changes this season, it's actually a pretty great skill and can not only do bossing, but mobbing as well. And the way that we're going to be scaling its damage is actually with damage over time. So we're still at damage over time. And the most important thing for us is the greater Fireball. Fireball deals 10% of the burning damage you've applied to an enemy as additional direct damage. With our enchantment slots, we're going to have fireballs exploding, and these explosions will get that 10% of the burning damage. And we've got the fireball enchant so that our fireballs themselves are going to be igniting. And this kind of leads to an interaction where the fireball is feeding itself damage because the fireballs will proc burning and then the fireball explosions will get more burning damage. And we're pairing that with a new unique called, or not a new unique, but a newly buffed unique, Gloves of the Illuminator, which are going to allow our fireballs to explode, causing more damage. And then these damage can feed more damage to our fireball. We're using some of the changes to the Sorcs and Conjurations to summon the Hydras, and then the Hydras are going to be dealing burn damage for us, and those are also going to feed into the damage of our fireball. And then we can get not only burn damage and direct damage, but we can also do some cool things with crit chance and crit damage. And that's kind of like a general consensus on the build. Now let's go over our gear specifics, and I am wearing some uniques for this build. However, I will provide options for if you don't have those uniques. The only required unique for this build, or really like the most important unique that you can get, is the Gloves of the Illuminator that adds the bounces to Fireball. These are great. Everything else is just added nice things to have, but the build works without them, especially as you're going from 50 to 75. These are some chase items to go after. So to start us off, I am using the Godslayer Crown. This gives us damage, crowd control duration, max life, and cooldown reduction. That is fantastic. All great things for this build. And whenever we stun, freeze, or mainly immobilize, is what we're doing on this build, we pull in enemies and get a damage multiplier against those enemies that are pulled. Tight groupings on this build are fantastic because it allows all of the fireball explosions to overlap. This allows us to just nuke those elites and those like tankier enemies by pulling in everything, and you pull the trash mobs, boom, tons of fire explosions. If you do not have this, you're looking for max health, cooldown, and ranks of Hydra and a resistance roll. And then ideally you're rocking the aspect that gives you ice armor, gives you unstoppable, and it also improves your armor. That's a really nice one to have. I'm not using that because I've got the Godslayer on, but that's what you'd go for there. On your chest piece, you're mainly looking for damage reduction rolls. I do have a lot of damage on mine right now. So I've got all stats damage, pyromancy skill damage, and burning reduction from burning enemies. The perfect aspect for this, I don't have it yet, I just haven't found it, is you take less damage from vulnerable enemies. We have enemies vulnerable a lot on this build because we've got high lucky hit chance. And so taking less damage from those enemies will improve your survivability drastically. I just don't have that aspect at the moment. Once again, this is pretty early, pretty scuffed version. Then we've got the Gloves of the Illuminator. Best in slot. If you don't have these and you really want to try what we're using here, go for ranks of Fireball, Lucky Hit, Crit Chance, and then any sort of like Lucky Hit to restore resource is actually pretty nice if you can get that rolled. On your pants, this is your damage reduction, your survivability piece. You want as much damage reduction, and ideally the best roll of a disobedience you can get. I have a very low roll of a disobedience right now, so I'm missing a lot of survivability on this build at the moment. We're still doing just fine. And then for my boots, I've got Esu's Heirloom on. These are just kind of perfect. They give us double movement speed, which is awesome, crit strike damage, which is awesome, and mana cost reduction, which is awesome. There's not much we could put aspect-wise on, and then we also get improved crit chance based off of our movement speed, which is another really nice thing to have. For your weapons, you're ideally looking for a wand and a focus. The reason you want to use a wand is because it has that implicit lucky hit chance. That is just amazing. This build relies on a lot of lucky hit. The more lucky hit that you can get, the better. It's one of the most important stats for this build. I've got damage over time, damage to close, damage to injured, and damage to burning enemies. Damage to vulnerable is great. Damage to distant is great. Fire damage is great. You're just looking for as many of these multipliers as you can get, or I guess they're now additive. Everything's additive. But damage over time, damage to burning, all these things that are going to improve our fireball damage is what you're mainly looking for. And then I've got the aspect. You may have one additional Hydra. Hydras are like a passive way to increase the damage of our fireballs. And when we have more active, we're going to be using these skill points in our skill tree to get more overall all damage dealt when we have more summons. So that's very nice there. On my focus, you're mainly looking for mana cost, cooldown, lucky hit, and crit chance are all great. I've got a dead roll with the barrier generation, and then increase the critical strike damage of Meteor and Fireball by 40%, double this bonus against healthy targets. This is just more damage for our fireballs, and obviously the more crit chance that you can get, which we've got here, which we can get on our other things, are just going to improve the damage of our fireball. Then for your amulet, spirit cost, or sorry, mana cost, cooldown, ranks of your conjurations can all be nice. I got conjuration skill damage, lucky hit while having a barrier, ranks of conjuration skills, and ranks of the inner flames passive, all great things. And then the big roll that you're looking for is you deal increased burning damage to enemies below 50% life. While enemies are affected by more damage over a time than their total life, you deal up to 150% increased burning damage to them. The reason this is so good is you may say, oh, if an enemy is already affected by more damage over time than their life, they would be dead anyway. So what is the point of this? The point of this is it's going to drastically increase our burn damage. Even if they would die anyways, they're going to die faster, and those dot ticks will be higher. Those dot ticks will feed our fireballs more damage. So this is a really important role, and that's why we have it on our amulet. For our rings, I currently have the X-Files Corroded Signet. This gives me damage over time, lucky hit chance cooldown, and lucky hit. My damage over time effects have a 50% chance to erupt, dealing 36k damage of the same type to nearby enemies. This does fire damage. It gets scaled by our fire damage increases, and it can crit. This is currently hitting like just over, last time I checked, over 100k on this build, and we're like barely gotten into our Paragon board. So this is a massive damage increase. If you do not have this ring, go for a lucky hit, crit chance, burn damage, and like damage to burning enemies or damage over time ring with the Battlecaster's aspect to get lucky hit ranks to your conjuration. That would be really nice. I just added X-Falls, and it's just a bit more damage to this build. And then our next ring, I've got fire damage, damage to distant enemies, damage to burning, and lucky hit chance. And then this is a really important aspect. There's two things that you could use here, but we are not using a basic skill, so we need a lot of mana regen. And this gives us a lucky hit chance to restore mana. The other aspect that you could use here is when you use a cooldown, you get guaranteed mana back. We have 4 cooldowns, so all of those are really, really nice. And those are our gear. For our vampiric powers, there's 4 core powers that we're using that you must have for this build, and then there's 1 flex slot that you could fit in anything that you'd like. So we absolutely need Flowing Veins. This gives us increased damage over time to enemies that are moving or affected by a vampiric curse. You would be surprised by the amount of times that enemies are not actually moving. So we're going to want that vampiric curse as well, and that's where the accursed touch comes in. We have a lucky hit chance to proc vampiric curse, and that has a chance to spread. This is so good. You get this it not from like the typical way that you get vampiric powers. You need to get it from the bounty boards, from the blood harvest area. Just killing enemies and doing the events there will get you that power. But this gives us a chance to proc Vampiric Curse, and then we're pairing that with Prey on the Weak. You deal 12% increased damage to vulnerable enemies. Enemies that are vulnerable while affected by a vampiric, or enemies are vulnerable while affected by a Vampiric Curse from your other vampiric powers. This is a way to add 20% increased damage to this build, because we have now enemies being vulnerable, and another, this will be like 18% when it's fully leveled, but even more damage to those vulnerable enemies, and because they're always going to be cursed and vulnerable, we're also always going to be guaranteeing ourselves Flowing Veins for that increased damage over time. These synergize really, really well together. And then we're also using Coven's Fang. Your Conjuration, Companion, Minion, and Bad Familiar attacks deal 52% increased damage to crowd-controlled enemies. We have a lot of Lucky Hit, and when we Lucky Hit, we can immobilize. So that's more damage for our Hydras, which feed more damage to our Fireballs. And also our Conjurations have a 30% chance to inflict Vampiric Curse. Once again, that's more chance to inflict a Vampiric Curse, which makes enemies vulnerable, which makes them take more dot damage. The flex slot here is the Undying, where I have Casting Skills heals us. There's a lot of things that we could use here. For example, as I showed you, don't have like the most survivability on this build because I'm missing my damage reduction from vulnerable enemies. I'm missing a better roll of a Disobedience. And so right now I've got this slotted just for the constant healing that it's giving us. But the other slot that I think would be really, really great here is the Anticipation node. Our ultimate skills gain 20% cooldown reduction and deal increased damage per damage over time that's nearby. This is also amazing, and I plan to swap this on and use this once I have a little bit more survivability. Right now, I'm just using the, like, you heal because I don't have those damage reduction, and I don't have that, like, taking less damage rolls quite yet. Now let's get into our skill tree. We're starting with Firebolt. This is very nice. The Glinting Firebolt, you deal 25% increased burning damage, and it would be nice to take. It only applies to the enemy that we hit, and there's usually so many enemies on screen that this just isn't going to do anything. Yes, it would be nice for bossing, but I just don't think it's worth losing one of the skills on our skill bar. They're too important to us. Next, we go down. We're ranking up Fireball, and then the burn damage from Fireball adds to the damage. And then we're also grabbing Elemental Dominance for our core skills that are cast above 50 mana, deal more damage, just more damage for our Fireball explosions. Then we're grabbing Flame Shield. Flame Shield heals us for our missing life. Teleport gives us damage reduction, and then we're grabbing Ice Armor, Enhanced Ice Armor. While Ice Armor is active, our mana regen is increased by 25%. This gives us survivability, gives us a barrier. We don't really need these other things, that's why I'm stopping here, and it's just going to give us more mana regen for this build. Then we get down to our Hydras. Now, there's something that I really want to mention with our Hydras, and that our Hydras can do a lot of damage and are going to be what we use to scale this build into higher Nightmare dungeons and higher bossing. However, in order to really scale the damage of your Hydras, you need the Paragon Board. And right now, once again, I have the Pyromaniac glyph level 9 and the Conjurer glyph at level 6. Everything else is level 1. And so as I play more and I engage with the endgame content, we're going to be scaling our Hydras up more and more. And those will feed into our damage. And then the actual endgame version of this will change quite a bit because we will be relying on Hydras more for our single target damage. However, at the moment, without a Paragon board, there's just not that much worth of scaling them, and so we're shifting some of our damage elsewhere. We're still using them, they're still burning things for us, and we're still using Conjuration Mastery with the 2 to get that 6% all damage dealt for our burns and everything else, and then Precision Magic. But right now, I'm just not scaling them as much as they can be scaled, and that's because I just don't have those tools available to me right now. Then we're going Align the Elements, Mana Shield. We're spending a lot of mana, we're regenerating a lot of mana, and Protection, giving us Barrier whenever we use a cooldown. We're coming over here, Inner Flames. We're grabbing all of this. Originally, I wasn't getting Devouring Blaze, but the increased crit damage is just even more damage, and I just saw that we were critting quite a bit on this build. I wasn't expecting to build it into crit, but we ended up going that way just because of how many crits are actually displaying on the screen. Then we've got Inferno with the Supreme Inferno. This gives us the no mana cost. This is what you want to use for bossing. Our boss rotation is you put your Hydras down, then you cast Inferno, and then you cast as many fireballs as you can, and as soon as that's over, you're proccing Ice Armor to get some of that mana regen back and the burning, and then if you ever need to use your Flame Shield or your Teleport to like avoid boss mechanics, you can pop those as well. Because I'm currently using the skill that heals me whenever I cast, I didn't feel like I needed Warmth. If I lose that and go for the ultimate cooldown, I would spec points into Warmth. Just right now, I don't really need that. Lastly, we get into our Keystone passives, which we genuinely have 2 pretty good options for. We've got Essu's Ferocity, which gives us increased crit damage and crit chance, and then we can also grab the Aspect that gives us increased attack speed, which is very nice. And then there's also Combustion, which gives us increased burning damage, and then per source of burn, we deal additional burning damage. I found that the more reliable is Combustion. I don't think it has quite the high of peak of Essu's Ferocity, and I do plan on messing around with this more when we get into the end game, and we've got more multipliers for our crit damage, and we've got more of that crit chance. But right now, I think Combustion is just the better all around, so that is what I'm using. Lastly, we go to my Paragon board. My Paragon board that I'm using, I want to show you because it's quite scuffed, and then I will have like an actual Paragon board that I think is going to be pretty good attached down in the description and as a pinned comment. The reason my board is pretty scuffed is because I haven't even had all of the glyphs drop for me. Like Flame Feeder, you deal increased burning damage and increased direct damage to burning enemies, has not dropped for me yet. So I can't use that. Torch, increased burning damage. You deal increased damage per nearby burning enemy. That also hasn't dropped for me yet. And so like my Paragon board is quite scuffed, and our damage is like way lower than it could be. So I'm currently just prioritizing getting our legendary nodes so that those can give us more damage, and then as we play more Nightmare Dungeons, I'll start changing the board to prioritize those glyphs. But I'm going right now, I've just got Conjurer for increased conjuration skill damage, and my conjuration skills have increased duration. That was just the glyph that I had available. We've got Searing Heat. This is really great. Our skills deal increased critical strike chance and deal increased direct damage. And then as we go through the board, we can grab fire damage here, which feeds into this, and we can grab the flame touch node here, which gives us more fire damage. And both of these feed into this multiplier, which is really, really nice. Then we're going up. I'm skipping this glyph because I just don't have glyphs to socket. We're grabbing Burning Instinct. This is going to give us increased burning damage by 10%, and then we can get another. So this is 25% increased burning damage, which is really nice there. And then I'm rushing. I don't have it yet, but I'm rushing down to Enchantment Master. My enchantments are going to be 20% stronger, and that should be nice for the Fireball Explosions. And we're using the enchant that we deal, all of our skills deal burning damage. So that's going to be really nice. And then once again, as we get more into the end game and our glyphs, I'm going to be focusing more on Hydras to scale some of our end game damage. Guys, that is going to do it for the video. I hope you enjoyed. I started this character, this SORC, and recorded this video on the same day. So I do apologize that I don't have all of these things that I want to have for this build, but hopefully me showing you that I'm lacking in so many things and I don't have these glyphs, I don't have these aspects, is an indication that this build does function quite well, and the ceiling to improve is quite high. And so yeah, I will be like finishing this with a endgame level 100 build, just not quite there yet. I will catch y'all in the next one, guys. Take care. Peace.